Sekiro was the second FromSoft game I ever played, and ever since, no game has even come close to comparing. From the elaborate world building to the detailed visuals and character designs, the game sure is unique, but nothing contributes to its uniqueness more than the combat. Every strike, deflection and counter, part of an intricate dance between player and opponent, where hesitation is defeat. Unlike traditional action combat, which is slow and rewards caution, Sekiro is a rhythm game at its core, rewarding those who master its tempo by answering aggression with aggression. It's a challenge for many starting out, yet once the combat clicks, it becomes almost effortless. The player no longer fights against the game, instead flowing with it, reading enemies' attacks as if instructions. This is even more important when you realise you can't just grind low-level enemies to make yourself stronger. It's one of the rare games where it isn't the character getting stronger, but the player. I loved it so much that it was the first game I ever platinumed. And while the game is still an excellent experience on subsequent playthroughs, you only get to play it for the first time once, which is why I'm creating my own Sekiro-inspired game. Not to copy it, but to capture that feeling once again for myself and hopefully others too. If you saw my last video, you'll recognise this duck that I animated. Using this as a reference, I made a low poly model in Blender, starting with some simple shapes. After creating one side, I used a mirror modifier to copy the shape to the other side, before painting some colours onto him for a bit of detail. I experimented with a few wing styles but settled on this one as it looked best in game. To bring him to life, we need to rig him, which will allow us to manipulate his joints. There's a Blender add-on called Rigify, which provides some excellent tools to speed up the rigging process. At first I tried using one of the pre-made bird skeletons, but had some issues getting it to move how I wanted. While the shape says bird, the movements he'll be doing are certainly more humanoid, so I used a human skeleton instead, adding the tail and beak controls on separately. After dragging the bones into place to match the duck, I parented the mesh to the skeleton with automatic weights. Using the Rigify add-on, I then generated a rig which will allow me to have IK controls. IK, or inverse kinematics, is a method used in animation and rigging to make movement look and feel more intuitive. Instead of rotating each joint manually, like in forward kinematics, inverse kinematics allows us to control the position of an end of a joint, with the rest of the limb adjusting automatically. Not only are the animations a lot easier to make using IK, but they also look a lot cleaner. Using the IK rig, I made these walking, running and sprinting animations. To make these into root motion, I took the Y movement of one of the feet while connected to the floor and pasted its inverse into the Y movement of the root bone. I then used the cycle modifier to extend the root bone movement infinitely, giving us root motion. Next, I tackled some attack animations. To make sure that the transitions between attacking and stopping look natural, each attack animation has 4 sections: the wind up, the slash, the slowdown, and the return to idle. Each subsequent attack in our chain starts in the same position as the previous animation's slowdown section, ensuring a seamless transition to the next attack while skipping the return to idle section. If there are no more attack inputs from the player, the return to idle section will play. Doing this, we avoid blending from the end of a swing immediately to idle, which can look quite messy, instead manually animating the character's return to idle position. Making the attack animation's root motion is a little bit more involved, but totally worth it. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a more in-depth video on my character creation, rigging and animation process. After importing into Godot, we now need a character controller to get things moving. For a simple game with a few actions, a single character controller script is a perfectly suitable option to use. However, once you start adding more and more layers, it can get really complicated quickly.
We're talking about this!
I took great inspiration from this video where Fairfight discusses a highly scalable design for a player state machine. Instead of a complicated player controller with a few hundred lines of code, we can break up the player code into different states. Each state has its own code that is only executed when that state is active. Breaking up the code like this makes it a lot more manageable. All of our states extend from a class called move. This means that any functions in the move class can be called by nodes which extend it. This is super useful as it stops us from having obsolete code duplicated across multiple scripts. What's cool about this is if we wanted to call a function from the move class, but have it be slightly different in a particular state, we can rewrite the function within that state's code. That state will then use the updated function, while all other states will use the default version unless specified otherwise. This is great for creating custom behaviors that only occur in given states. For example, customizing the behavior executed upon entry or exit of a particular state. So what does the default cycle of the code look like? In the main player script, on ready, the visuals are paired to the model node, which contains the skeleton and the code for each state. Every game tick, the inputs are managed by the input gatherer. The input gatherer translates the player's inputs into an input package containing information about the current input, any combat related inputs, and also the input direction of movement inputs. I also added my own dead zone logic here for movement inputs to prevent stick drift affecting the player's inputs negatively. Once the input is gathered, the model node is then updated using the input as its argument. Each state contains its own logic that dictates whether it should switch to a new state or stay in the current one. This switch logic is checked each tick, switching the active state where applicable before finally executing any state-specific code. It might seem intimidating at first, but after playing around with it for a while, it's an extremely intuitive design with immense scaling capabilities. A small number of inputs can activate countless different states dependent on specific parameters. For example, I use this to give player movement weight by intermittently activating start and stop states following a movement input. Another excellent feature of this architecture is how it handles combos. Attaching a consecutive move node as a child to an attacking state, we can determine which state will come next given a specific input, allowing us to create combos from a string of attack inputs. I'm currently only using it for a 5 attack cycle, but in the future, I'm looking to expand the different attacks the player can use to create more dynamic combat choices. It wouldn't be a Souls-like game without a camera locking system. I implemented a lock-on component which I can attach to anything in the game. When toggling the camera lock, we check the camera's view for any lock-on components that are on screen. First, we check the top section of the view, and if no targets are found, we check the bottom section. Upon identifying targets, those closest to the center of the screen are considered, with a weighting system to favor targets closer to the player. With an optimal target selected, the camera rig is then rotated to face the target. To switch between targets, we take the input vector of either a mouse or controller and draw a line from the current target in that direction in view space. View space is a coordinate system where the X and Y axes are parallel to the screen, with the Z axis corresponding to depth into the scene. We can use the X and Y coordinates of objects in view space to identify where they are on screen. We will calculate the difference in angle between the input vector and each other target on screen. With consideration for distance, the target with the smallest angle is selected as the new camera target, the camera now facing it instead. But now when we lock on, our movement animations are completely thrown off as the player is normally always moving forwards relative to the way it's facing. That's where skeleton modifier 3Ds come in. We can use skeleton modifiers to override or blend in separate animations than those currently playing on the animation player. This comes in really handy when we want to consider lateral, non-forward movement. To get omnidirectional movement, I use 2 skeleton modifiers, one for forwards and backwards movement and the other for side-to-side movement. The player's movement input vector is used to determine which animations are used and what influence they have on the final pose, with the X component of the input vector controlling left to right and the Y component controlling front to back. This works really nicely, but sometimes we get a little bit of stuttering in the animations, which is most notable when switching between the start and stop movement animations quickly. To fix this, I developed a start-stop system for the skeleton modifiers so that their influence would smoothly lerp up and down when starting or stopping respectively, instead of instantly snapping to the correct position. As a result, we get super smooth omnidirectional movement from only 4 animations. Now that we have a solid, responsive player controller, it's time to start working on a basic enemy to flesh out the combat mechanics. Just for development, I'm reusing the player model recolored yellow while I build the combat logic. I created a super basic AI that can detect the player and walk towards it at a certain range. For testing purposes, I gave it 2 modes that I can toggle between, spamming attacks and spamming parry. To register a sword hit, we need to utilize hitboxes and hurtboxes. These are the invisible shapes that determine how attacks interact with characters. A hitbox is the area in which an attack can do damage. We can attach a hitbox to our sword so that when a character attacks, the hitbox follows the path of the weapon. Hurt boxes, on the other hand, represent the area in which a character can register being hurt. Fundamentally, when a hitbox intersects with a hurt box, we can trigger the owner of the hurt box to react on hit. To create a more robust system, we perform several eligibility checks upon hitboxes and hurt boxes colliding. Firstly, we check if the hitbox is a weapon. Next, we check that the intersecting hitbox and hurtbox don't share the same owner. Then, we check if the hurtbox's owner is currently vulnerable, and similarly, we check if the hitbox's owner is currently attacking. To check these conditions, we use a back-end animation database that stores information about the characters for the duration of each animation. For more information about this, go check out the original video by Fairfight. Lastly, we check that the hurtbox isn't on the hitbox's ignore list. The ignore list serves as a method to stop multiple hits registering from the same attack. Upon registering the initial hit, we append the hurtbox to the hitbox ignore list so that it isn't detected again until the next attack where the ignore list is refreshed. After verifying the eligibility of a hit, we then check the receiver's current state to decide between three outcomes. Parry triggers the parry logic, block triggers the block logic, and anything else triggers the hit logic. For each of them, we call a react on function that adjusts the health and posture based on the attack's hit data. We then force the state machine to transition to the respective reactionary state. Each outcome has its own particles, lighting, and sound effects triggered upon activation. I really like the look of the light flashes that come from the parry, especially in the dark, as it really makes our light reactive edge highlight shader pop. Interestingly, when testing the parry mechanics in Sekiro, I noticed that if you are hit by an attack just after you stop blocking, it will still register as a block. So I added the stop block state, where you lower your sword, as a trigger for reacting as a block also. Sekiro's parry window is 0.2 seconds, so I decided to use this timing for my parry window too. I watched this video about parry windows in Sekiro, and they pointed out an interesting mechanic that prevents the player from spamming the parry button. Every time the player presses the parry button in quick succession without actively parrying an attack, it diminishes the time frame in which the parry window is active. To keep in line with this, I added a mechanic that counts how many parries have been pressed in a given time frame. Every parry spam without parrying an attack adds to the count until hitting a max of 4. For the first two parry inputs, there is no effect on the parry timing window. However, at the third parry input, the parry window is reduced to 0.1 seconds, and for the fourth, the parry window is 0 seconds, meaning that all parries will register as blocks. This prevention mechanic can be reset by not spamming parry for a certain amount of time or by successfully parrying an attack. Now that our parrying system works, it's time to work on a better AI than this garbage. I was once again inspired by Fairfight, who released a video where he deconstructs the AI from Dark Souls 3's Gundyr and recreates it in Godot. The system is actually pretty simple conceptually. Like our player controller, all state machine nodes extend from a common class, in this case, the hierarchical finite state machine class. On ready, we check each node for children, and if they have children, the node is marked as a container. Every game tick, we start at the top of the hierarchy. If the node is a container, we check conditions to determine which internal move is chosen. This is repeated indefinitely until a non-container node is selected. While we can run code in container nodes, the bulk of the behavior is coded into the non-container nodes. For my test enemy, as children of the active node, I'm going to have two behaviors, defensive and attacking. While defensive, the enemy will either walk towards the player or orbit them depending on the distance between them. Upon entering the defensive route, the AI picks a random length of time from our range to stay defensive for. Once the timer finishes, we transition to the attacking route. When attacking, we can assign attack combos as well as special attacks. We can make these be chosen randomly or only chosen if certain conditions are met. For example, initiating a lunge attack at medium or long range. In the attack combo node, when active, it chooses a random number of attacks to do within a range of our choice. We can choose which attack it starts on, but as our 5 attack cycle can loop, we can start on any of our attacks. On each node in the combo, we set which moves can follow that node, choosing randomly if more than one follow-up attack. I've set mine up such that any attack that ends with the sword on a certain side can be followed by an attack that starts with the sword on that same side. With the limited number of attacks I currently have, this keeps combos fresh and a little bit more unpredictable. To make the combat more of a back and forth exchange, we need to make the enemy parry when the player is attacking. To avoid the enemy instantly parrying with insane reaction speeds when the player attacks, instead of checking the player's state or inputs, we can check if the player's is attacking variable is true. If it's true, then we can tell the enemy to parry. In Sekiro, enemies will only parry a certain number of attacks before countering with their own. The enemy's shift from defense to offense is accompanied by a more pronounced parry with more dramatic particles, lighting and sound effects. In our code, we can set a random range of attacks to parry. Every time the enemy parries an attack, we -1 from the will parry hits variable. When parrying, if this variable is 1, we instead transition to the end parry state, which is signified by those more dramatic particle effects, lighting and sound. After exiting this state, we then transition immediately into attacking. Now with this setup, when we attack the enemy, they will parry for a few hits before firing back with their own attacks for us to parry, mirroring that back and forth combat seen in Sekiro. Lastly, we need to implement a system for deathblows. In Sekiro, deathblows aren't just about killing the enemy, they act as a reward earned by the player while engaging in combat. Because of this, they're intentionally designed to be as satisfying as possible, combining brutal choreography with cinematic camera and audio. To realize this mechanic in our game, when attacking, we can check if enemies are in range and are deathblowable. I'm currently checking this each time the player enters an attacking state, which works, but I'm not sure if this is the best way, so let me know if you can think of a better way to do this. If a deathblowable character is detected, the player's state machine is forced to transition to the deathblow state, while the enemy is transitioned to the deathblown state. In these states, the player and enemy are lerped to face each other, and the player is lerped to a defined distance from that enemy. This makes sure that the deathblow animations between the player and the enemy line up perfectly. Next, we zoom and adjust the camera so that the player and enemy are clearly visible on screen during the deathblow. This, in combination with our audio, creates that dramatic feel that we're looking for. With the deathblow integrated, we've successfully recreated the basic mechanics of Sekiro combat in our game. I really think that it captures the essence of what makes Sekiro a truly great experience and a game that plays incredibly smoothly. Sometimes I lose track of time when testing the mechanics, and I truly feel I've made something special. The game feels tight, impactful, and surprisingly addictive. But more than anything, this is just the beginning. With the foundations laid, there's so much more to explore in this journey. But for now, I'm proud of where we're at, especially since this is my first game dev project. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and a comment sharing your thoughts. I'll be back soon with more updates, breakdowns, and behind the scenes insight into my game dev journey.